Yeah, here's a couple of things, Philly. I picked this up off of William Lane Craig, so maybe this is going to help you understand a little bit better where I'm coming from. So I'm going to start this off. You're the one that's arguing for the affirmative, right? That the universe exists or there are events because of God existing. Is that right? I didn't say that, Philly. We're talking about what the roles are here in the debate. So put your ears on. You're arguing for this position about essential causal series. So you're making the positive case that there are essential causal series. Well, Philly, I think you're confused about what our roles are, our respective roles. So hear this out.
The duty of the affirmative speaker in a debate is to present a prima facie case in support of an affirmative under debate. It's the role of the negative speaker to then examine the case presented by the affirmative speaker and expose any weaknesses in his case.
Okay, so that's my role, Philly, is to expose the weaknesses and the problems in your argument. Your mic.
Okay, but I would prefer if you let me lay out my own argument instead of trying to guess what my argument might be. Okay, let's start from the beginning. The argument is based on ontological dependence, not temporal succession. And there's a distinction there. So when we talk about ontological dependence and we talk about the two types of causal series that are classified in this argument, we're talking about an essential causal series place that did not exist but can only take place if there are underlying ontologically dependent states that exist at the same moment that event takes place. None of those ontologically dependent states and conditions can go out of existence. They must always be in existence for the event to take place. An accidental causal series, which is not part of my argument, but for the purposes of knowing the difference, is an event that takes place whereby the causal chain can be broken. Members of the series do not have to be in existence for the event to take place. So knowing the difference between the two, we can go forward, right? So one of the examples of an essential causal series given by Aristotle and Aquinas is the act of taking, and the stone flies across the room or the floor or the ground. That event did not exist prior to the event taking place, and that event is wholly dependent upon underlying sustainable conditions and series which allow it to take place. So for example, the hand holding the stick, picking up the stick, moving the arm towards the stone in order for the stone to move is dependent upon the muscles of the hand, the nerves in the arm, the brain signals given to the nerves in the arm, the brain being nourished by the blood supply, by a beating heart, the molecular structure and DNA of me being a human being, the weak gravitational force of being on this planet, and so on and so forth, deeper and deeper into that moment when that event took place. From that, something that we can observe, we observe the event, we can see the dependence, we can draw some conclusions as to the nature of what the first member of that event in the ontological dependent causal series might be. That first member, by necessity, could not be material. Why? Because if it were material, in other words, if it were a material always has potentiality to change state, we would have to explain how it was actualized as material. So the first member of that series would have to be something that would be purely actual. There are two different schools of thought as to what that might be. You could propose a purely actual material, but you'd have to explain how that might come to be in defiance of all the laws of physics into this conclusion. You would have to describe how materials can self-actualize in order for them to be necessary materials. So we can make a reasonable conclusion that it is not a material cause because it would just be part of an infinite regression of that essential causal series. An infinite regression is not a satisfactory answer, not only in physics but in metaphysics. So we could propose that that first member is purely actual. That is, and it is immaterial in nature. So it is purely actual, it has no unrealized potentialities, it's immaterial, and it has the power to sustain ontologically the conditions that allow that event to take place. So it has to have power. It also has to have intellect, in that it possesses the knowledge of construction of underlying support in order for those actions and laws to exist in the first place. That being said, so we have concluded that it's immaterial. It can never go out of existence. It's purely actual. It has no unrealized potentialities. It is powerful. We can conclude it is an intellect. We, as theists, would call that pure actuality God. Now, the nature of that God beyond that is another area of discussion. The argument simply goes to point that that immaterial first member of the series has those characteristics, and that it is essential by necessity to allow that event to take place, that essential causal chain. You're up.
Okay, Philly. So I wrote down a bunch of stuff that you're talking about. You're talking about pure actuality, and then you were talking about two schools of thought. So these are based on axioms, right? These are based on assumptions, aren't they, Philly? Right? These aren't based on deductive arguments. This is based on abductive reasoning. And then you're saying that infinite regressions are not satisfactory. Do you have an argument for that, Philly? Because earlier you were saying that this wasn't a prime mover argument, but why are you talking about infinite regressions? Pass the mic.
Okay. No, they're not based on cause and effect, and that some, not all, are dependent upon things being in existence. So no, the answer is no, they're not based on assumptions. And why infinite regression is not satisfactory for material is because we have no example in any way, shape, or form in our history of science and physics and cosmology that would indicate to us that material can self-actualize, right? So if we are going to propose infinitely existing material, i.e. a universe, for example, we're going to have to determine how that universe can put the essential causal series into effect at that moment. Not in the beginning of time, but at the moment I described when I took the stick and hit the stone. You're up.
Philly, I don't know what you're talking about. Based on observations, but not on assumptions. What about the problem of induction, Philly? Philly, are you going to concede that there's a problem of induction? Philly, aren't you trying to take something that we talk about generally and trying to argue for the specific? Isn't that inductive reasoning? Going from the general to the specific? Ask the mic.
No, we observe cause and effect. We observe cause and effect in science. Science is a discipline which uses cause and effect. We observe it in physics. I ask you, in order for the debate to continue, if you do believe that some things can produce effects, results, or conditions. You're up.
Philly, I'm here to examine your argument. And so far, it's just based on some assumptions that you're making, some inductive and abductive reasoning. Right? So it's based on some sort of intuition that you're arguing. And somehow, I guess you think that you can arrive at some sort of disembodied mind being the sustainer but not the creator of the universe, I take it. I don't know why you brought up, what did you say? In infinite regression is not satisfactory. I don't know what you mean by that. Do you have an argument for this, or are you just going to make statements like infinite regressions and then claim that you're not arguing for a prime mover? Pass the mic.
Yeah, one of the preconditions of this debate is that we answer questions, right? I've answered 2 of your questions. You've refused to answer mine. The question again, and we need to do this before we go on. Do you believe that some things can produce effects, results, or conditions? Do you believe that? Next up.
Oh no, Philly, you're confused, right? That's why I started off with that bit from William Lane Craig. Your duty is to lay out a case. My role is to examine your arguments for problems and flaws in reasoning. So you're confused about the parameters of this debate. Pass the mic.
All right, let's say that I think through observation we can see that some things produce effects, results, and conditions. Now you'll have to refute that, right? So knowing that, if we know some things produce effects, causes, and conditions, we can say that my argument is not based on assumptions, but on observations, that some things produce effects, causes, and conditions. So that is the answer to your question. Next.
Philly, my views here aren't relevant, right? You're the one who has the burden. You're the one arguing for the affirmative. So, so far, there's just no valid argument for me to look at. That's the mic.
Well, I gave you something that produced an effect and a cause and a condition, right? I gave you an example. So I would like you to argue over why that example is not valid as an example of an effect, cause, and condition. And I would like you to argue or refute the fact that there are underlying ontological dependencies of that event I described and the ontological dependencies as I described them and what the conclusions might be. So far, you've just complained that you don't like the way I'm phrasing things. Do you not understand the way I'm phrasing things? Causes are some things or someone that produces an effect, a result, or condition. Something or someone that makes something happen or exist. That is the definition of that. There is no basis for the refutation or attempted refutation of my argument, because that is what my argument is based on. So if you don't agree with it, then you're going to have to explain how cause does not exist as a refutation. That's the only way you could refute it. If you do agree with it, we can move on to the nuts and bolts of the argument. Next up.
Oh, I know that you would like me to argue, Philly. I know you'd love to shift the burden, but I don't have the burden here, Philly. I'm just examining your worldview and your arguments, like I set out in the beginning. Right? The roles here are very clear. You need to make a cogent, coherent argument, and you haven't done that. I don't need to argue against nonsense. Pass the mic.
Well, can you tell me how I have not shown that there is something, or when I pick up the stick in my hand and I hit the stone with the stick, can you show me that that is not a cause producing an effect? That would be a refutation. Next up.
Philly, you think you have some sort of cosmological argument, right? But you haven't made one yet. I don't know why you're talking to me about you picking up a stick and hitting a ball. What has that got to do with the universe? Nothing, Philly. Do you want to argue by analogy for your worldview, Philly? Because I'm fine with that. Is that the best that you've got, Philly? I pick up a stick, I hit a ball, and somehow a God must exist if things are the cosmos, right? So, Philly, earlier you conceded that the universe can be beginningless, but it still has to have a causer. Can you explain that? Philly, if you want to bail now, that's fine with me. This will just go up on the blog. You're the one who thinks you have an argument for the universe being contingent on God, for motion, movement, cause and effect being contingent on God. And you don't have one, right? So you tried to do this move where an infinite regression is not satisfactory. That's just a bald assertion. You don't give any arguments, Philly. So what you're doing is you're conceding that the universe can be beginningless, but it can't be without a cause. You just haven't given us any reason to believe that that's coherent whatsoever. Pass the mic.
Well, once again, you didn't answer the question, but let's go back and I put forth an argument that essential causal series exist. You have not refuted it. You have not stated how causal series did not exist. And I am not arguing that all causes and effects are because of God. In fact, in my opening statement, I said that there are accidental series and there are essential causal series. And that not all causal series are the same. And I said, and we are not arguing about the beginning of the universe. We are arguing about my example of a stick hitting a stone. So either we're going to address my argument, or as you are attempting to try to shift the discussion somewhere else, the debate is over because you have not answered a single question or refuted a single assertion. All you have thus far. So I go back. Can you show me how the example that I gave you is not an essential causal series? Simple. That's how you would refute this.
Oh, I'm just going to say that premise one, I reject. There are no essential causal series. Your mic.
Okay, on what basis? You have to give a reason, or else I can just say I reject your rejection. What is your reason? That's not a disapproval or a refutation. That's just an objection. Tell us the reason for your objection.
Well, Philly, the same as yours. It's just based on my experience, based on my observations. There are no essential causal series. Can you refute that?
Yeah, I did. I gave you an example of one. Tell me how it isn't. So if there are no essential causal series, what kind of series are there? There's a way you could refute it as well. Some causal series are essential, some are not. I gave you an example of both. So you would have to refute how they're not valid, other than just your belief. I gave you a concrete example. Your belief doesn't count. Beliefs don't count in this. We're using observations about our reality, and we're drawing a metaphysical conclusion based on those observations of our reality. Either the observations are false for some reason or they're true. I presented you an observation. I constructed it so that you could understand it, and you're telling me you reject it, but you haven't given me a reason why. You're up.
You're wrong.
Well, we can see that the debate now has degraded into basically a bunch of objections, no refutation, no argument, just objections to the examples without any basis other than feeling and belief. I rest my case.
I just rejected your premise, Philly, because it's a bald assertion, just a naked assertion, right? There are essential causal series and there are accidental causal series. We just disagree, right? It's just that simple. That's the mic.
I think it's kind of funny that Philly lost, can't quite understand why he lost, doesn't understand why he still hasn't done the one thing that he was asked to do, was present that observation that his God can do something. Pointing out that we can show that a person's arm can hit a ball, that's a real person, real ball, real stick, could happen, doesn't solve Philly's problem that he has to show that his God can do something like that or something at all in order for it to be a reasonable to assume it could cause a universe. He can't get there. So he does this avoidance thing and says, well, there has to be a cause and a first cause, and then he grants God this special power, and it's a special pleading. That is to your argument. That is your total argument, Philly. Don't you understand what you're saying? It's not my fault if you don't understand what you're saying, right? You're saying it's an observable event. That's what you said. I agree, Philly. I guess you're right. It isn't my fault if you don't know what you're saying. And I think it's kind of funny because the problem is very obvious, right? They don't really have a God. They can't show their God can do anything, but they want to slide it into any place man doesn't understand everything. It's the God of the gaps and the God of ignorance. And as man learns, it shrinks. And this has gone on for how long in history? How long has it just gotten smaller and smaller and smaller? Yes, we can observe it because they're both real, right? So, Philly, how do you observe your God doing something, right? Philly, how do you confirm your God can do something? Back to what we asked you earlier. How could it be different than Bugs Bunny? I could just insert Bugs Bunny. Could be just as easily as your God, right? Or any other magical, unreal being. Because magic will fit any answer. That's why it's not an explanation of what happened unless you can show that your God can do something like pick up a ball and throw it or hit it with a stick. But apparently your God can't do that. But you're going to then use it as a reference point to say your God did something that can't be confirmed or observed, and that's a logical, reasonable answer. And I would ask you, what? How does that get to be logical to you? And why are you not even ashamed to bring it forward? We told that to you what, 2 hours ago before you even debated this? And you brought it forward too. You brought nothing. So I'm embarrassing myself because you say an invisible, unrealistic, unreliable being created the universe? How am I embarrassing myself? Philly, I know that this is hard for you, but you're using that as your reference point for reality. This is something we can observe, we can confirm. Now, where is the reference for your God being able to do something like that? Anything at all? How is he going to cause something if you can't show it exists enough to cause something? I know. So you can't use it for a creation of the universe. So you can't use it for your God. So when are you going to get to where you're going to impose it as something that can cause a universe? No, it doesn't. Because you're not showing them where the immaterial can cause something to happen in the material world. Duh, you're still stuck with a magical Bugs Bunny like argument, and you're not embarrassed by it. I don't know. I just don't get it. You're right. I don't get it. Why that would be something that you think is reasonable and not embarrassing, I don't know. RF, must be your turn.
Yeah, this was a debate between PhillyFever and I. So, okay, so I'm just going to read the text here. What are you saying? Obviously, it's not an argument for the creation of the universe. So we went over this before we started recording, Philly. So the universe can be beginningless, correct? But you still think it has a causer, a mover, an actualizer, something like that? You're saying the argument shows that an immaterial, pure actuality does exist. I don't see the argument. But Philly, let me give you an example because I took some notes here, right? You were giving us two schools of thought, right? I'm not interested in two schools of thought, Philly. Okay, and then you're saying that infinite regressions is not a satisfactory response. Well, that's just a bald assertion, isn't it, Philly? So what sort of arguments do I need to come up with against someone who's just going to come in here and go, infinite regressions are not a satisfactory response? I mean, are you lecturing me, Philly? Or are you actually making arguments? What if I said infinite regressions are a satisfactory response? I'm going to contradict you, and I don't have to do a damn thing other than just state the opposite. Because all you're offering up to me is your opinion, your view, your feelings. Right? Well, I didn't end it whatsoever. Who? So, Philly, what you're arguing for is that the universe, if there's anything occurring in it at all, it has to do with some sort of disembodied mind. That's the Christian God. Is that it in a nutshell, Philly? Because I just don't see how you make the connection. Could it be a deist God, Philly? Could it be some sort of causal entity that's not a personal being, Philly? I don't know, because you're a Christian, and somehow you think that this argument must result in your God being, why things happen at all. Ask the mic.
Rev, for the sake of the argument in an eternal universe, okay, just for the sake of, now, I don't believe there's an eternal universe, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the argument, right? And when I said, we use the term two schools of thought, it's rhetorical, not two formal schools. Two choices is what I was trying to say. The reason that we say infinite regression is not satisfactory, Rev, and I want you to pay attention here. Well, here's the dog. I gotta go. Hold on. I gotta let him out.
Might as well pause it for a bit, Delta, until he comes back.
Okay, back to the argument. The reason that infinite regression is not satisfactory, Rev, is because you would have to hold that anything material, either material actualizes, matter and energy actualize into different states. They're actualized by something. Something makes them move into a different state, right? If you don't agree with that, then you'd have to propose at some point in time there is a purely actual self-actualizing material entity of some type. So you'd have to posit that. I don't know of any examples of that in any scientific theories, studies, or anything else. Any examples of that we've currently observed, anything that we observed in physics, cosmology, whatever. There has never been an example either posited or observed or put forth as a theory of self-actualizing material that comes into being from nothingness, pure nothingness, and actualizes its own state from a prior state. Don't bring up the virtual particle thing, because that is not a good example. It is, the virtual particles appear from a change in a quantum energy field state. So something has actualized its appearance. So once again, there are no examples of that. That's why infinite regression is not satisfactory, not only from a philosophical standpoint, but from the standpoint of scientists and physicists. That is why scientists and physicists put forth things like multiverses and oscillating universe theory, what have you. And even then they say first conditions are not explainable. So the Occam's razor, if you want to bring Occam's razor into this, a more simple explanation is that instead of trying to posit this material that somehow self-actualizes and is eternal, you can bring into the equation the idea that it's immaterial. Very attractive idea in any discipline. Next up.
Yeah, Philly. I think you're confused about the views in cosmology, right? I don't know what this business is about material that comes into being out of nothing. Whose view do you think that is, Philly? Do you think that a quantum vacuum is nothing, Philly? Philly, does a quantum vacuum have mass? Philly? Does a negative vacuum have mass? Yes or no? Philly? Philly? That's a yes or no question, Philly. I'm a little sick and tired of your lectures, right? And poisoning the well. Oh, this is why cosmologists are coming up with oscillating models and multiverses. You just don't like their imaginations, do you, Philly? Right? But that's not an argument against them. So what you want to say is, well, yes, these things are conceivable, but I don't want to entertain them. So, Philly, do you have an argument for why the universe couldn't have had a contraction phase prior to the inflation phase? Yes or no? Pass the mic.
Well, that's not the debate. So we're not going to. We're going to start a new debate. We can start a new debate, but I don't use the beginning of the universe or temporal succession as my most effective argument. You still haven't addressed my most effective, an essential causal series. You still haven't told me why it's not an essential causal series, other than you don't believe it to be. You haven't told me what, if you even believe that causal series exist, or why you don't believe they exist. All you're saying is that I don't think they exist. So there's no refutation there. All you have done thus far is state a belief with absolutely no refutation. If this was a formal debate, and I think you can see that I've had a little training in this, you would lose hands down. All you're doing is complaining. You got to present a refutation that's based on something other than I disagree, right? So if you disagree with my example as an example of essential causal series, tell me why you disagree, and that would be your refutation. If you cannot present that, we can move on to the rest of the argument. Next.
Not only are you inexperienced, Philly, but you were ignoring what I started this off with, what your role in the debate is. So let me refresh your memory since you have ADD.
The duty of the affirmative speaker in a debate is to present a prima facie case in support of an affirmative answer to the question under debate. It's the role of the negative speaker to then examine the case presented by the affirmative speaker and expose any weaknesses in his case.
I think I've shown all sorts of weaknesses in your arguments. Not only that, Philly, but you're confused. You're saying that's not the debate, but you're the one that brought up material that comes into being out of nothing, Philly. I didn't bring that up. You're the one who brought up oscillating universes, multiverses. I didn't bring that up, did I, Philly? I didn't change the parameters of the debate at all. I just responded to your assertions. Pass the mic. I'm assuming my role in the debate, and that's to find problems in your argument. So you're making inductive inferences and you're using abductive reasoning. Pass the mic.
No, I brought up the nature of material and self-actualizing material because it's a concept in this argument in a philosophical sense, not because I wanted to argue about the nature of the universe or oscillating universe theory or anything else. That's what you decided that you wanted to go down that road. After you heard it, you